All right. We are now ready to continue with the special Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Today's November 10th, 2014. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Mr. Kretz, Mr. Blumenfield, Mr. Englander, and Mr. Bonin. We've got a full contingent, and we're ready to proceed. Members, I'd propose items 3 and 4 as consent candidates. Unless anyone has questions or objections, those two items will be deemed approved on consent. We have a closed session item that I'm told we can consider in open session, item number 5, and that will be very brief. Okay, why don't we go ahead and take item 5 then quickly.
I have one question, but it's not for...
Item number 5 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to request for waiver of conflict of interest.
Good afternoon. This is on the Independent Living Center of Southern California versus City of Los Angeles case. There's been an issue regarding a determination that the city attorney's office was in conflict in that case, and so it's been handled by outside counsel. The city attorney has a report on the status of that conflict.
Yes, Patty Huber from the CAO. At this point, based on discussions with the city attorney, we're here to request that a waiver be granted to them, waiving conflict of interest on this case. They have looked at the facts of the case and believe they could, with this waiver, now be party to or part of our council team, and they can maybe explain it better than me. Then
Assistant Attorney Noreen Vincent is going to make that presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Good afternoon, members. Just as a little recap, you may recall several years ago there were a number of cases filed against both the city and the CRA. They had to do with allegations that neither the city nor the CRA complied with federal standards in allowing for various housing projects to go up in the city of Los Angeles. At about the same time, the Housing and Urban Development Department conducted an audit of the city and the CRA and determined that there were some issues and concerns with the projects. The city attorney's office initially was representing the city in all of these matters. There was the Mailing case, the Independent Living Center case, and the voluntary compliance agreement issues that were surfaced by HUD. Right around a few months after the case was filed and after the city and CRA began negotiating with HUD, the CRA was dissolved by action of state law. Prior to that time, the City Attorney's Office had represented this Community Redevelopment Agency pursuant to a city ordinance which allowed for the City Attorney's Office to represent the agency. The City Council approved their budget, approved their plans, and so we had represented the agency for a number of years. After the dissolution, the City Attorney's Office continued to represent the agency for a period of time. At some point after the lawsuits were filed and after the CRA was dissolved, there was a determination made that there were interests that the city had, that the CRA had, that were potentially adverse to each other. And as a result, the City Attorney's Office recommended that outside conflict counsel be retained. That was done, and now for, I guess, several years, the litigation has gone on. My understanding is that in the Mailing case, the case was dismissed. It's up on appeal. With respect to the Independent Living Center case, there was a cross-complaint filed by the city against the CRA. That complaint was dismissed with prejudice. However, there remain some issues where the city and the CRA, now the DLA, may remain adverse. And while the City Attorney's Office has been asked by your committee to look at the issue, to review the issue again, we have done so and determined that there may still be adverse issues, likely adverse issues in the litigation, and for us to become involved again would require that there be a waiver from both the City Council as well as from the designated local agency. With respect to the negotiation of the voluntary compliance agreement with HUD, or the compliance agreement, the CRA has already signed the agreement. The city remains in discussions. We think that we're not likely precluded from representing the city in those negotiations, but we also believe that it would be prudent to obtain a waiver in that case as well.
So none of the conflicts are mandatory disqualifiers. They're all waivable, and they need to be waived by the city as well as by the successor agency?
We believe that if there is, that is correct, a conflict would be required by both the city as well as the successor agency, and that if those waivers were granted, that we could become involved again in the litigation.
Great. So now, we just recently authorized an appropriation to outside counsel in this case, I believe through December.
That's correct, Mr.
Correct.
Chairman. That's right.
So would it be, it would be my hope, if this is consistent with what the city attorney would be able to do, that the city attorney take over fully on all of these matters. And there will be certainly some transitional needs while the city attorney's office gets up to speed. So I'm assuming that at some point between now and the end of December, those files will all come to your office, will be done with outside counsel. Is that?
I think we probably have the resources to do it, Mr. Chairman. We don't know exactly what outside counsel has been doing. The CAO has been responsible, the mayor's office really has been running litigation, not the CAO's office.
Okay.
And so we are, to be blunt, somewhat in the dark about how that's been handled. But we also do need the waiver that Ms. Vincent referred to from DLA.
I'm going to move.
That's not
Right.
a foregone conclusion.
I'm going to move that we approve the waiver right away. We'll get that to council right away. It would be my hope that we can have the city attorney's office take over the whole thing. But in any event, the appropriation to outside counsel only goes through December. So that would, if there's any other work by that outside counsel after December 31st, they're going to have to come back here, right? So,
Understood.
So, Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, just quick. So, not a problem with the mandatory disqualification stuff. Is there any increased liability or risk that we should be aware of in terms of granting this waiver, exposure that we would have with the city attorney being able to look back in terms of cases? And
If by liability you mean in terms of our ability to come up to speed and step in, because we wouldn't.
That's one piece in terms of having the
Okay.
attorneys, but I was thinking more legal liability. You know, even though we don't have a conflict according to mandatory, conflicts, if there is some other perceived conflict out there that's going to end up costing us in a lawsuit.
No, I think that the whole purpose of our coming before the council and also recognizing that we would need the waiver from the DLA is to make sure that we would have the waivers that would allow us to become involved in the case again. And so there should not be any liability from that.
Members, anything further on this? All right, then it'll be the action of the committee to recommend to the council waiver of the conflicts, and let's move that forward to council as quickly as we can. Thank you
Thank you.
very, very much to the city attorney's office on this. It means a lot to us. All right. That brings us then to item number 1.
Item number 1 is the Los Angeles Fire Department report relative to a fiscal year 2014-15 interim budget request in the amount of $4.1 million for additional staff, overtime supplies, and other expenses. The Public Safety Committee approved the recommendations on October 24th, and the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee waived the consideration of the report.
Thank you. And the fire chief is here. Chief Terrasas, welcome. Thank you for your patience. Sorry to keep you waiting this
No
long.
problem, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, we're here to discuss the interim budget request. And as I thought about putting this request together, I thought about the recurring theme that I heard everywhere I went when I was recently appointed, with the elected officials, with our department members, with the community. And the words I heard on a constant basis were to restore and reform the fire department. In addition to that, as I was going through the promotional process, the mayor asked me what my vision of the optimal LAFD would look like. I told him it would be a department that was metric-driven, technologically sophisticated, community-focused, and reflective of the people that we serve. He further simplified that concept by saying the priorities for him were the 3 R's: response times, resources, and being reflective. The budget request before you today is a first critical step to restoring and reforming the fire department. I'm here to answer any questions you may have, and if you'd like, I could go through each item.
Well, thank you. I think we've probably all had a chance to look at it. So given the hour, why don't we go straight to questions, and we'll start with our Public Safety Chair, Mr. Englander.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Krikorian. Mr. Chair, I want to thank the fire chief. You're coming in at a very difficult time within the department because its department has really been decimated, as you said. It has for many reasons, and many fingers to point to, and we can only at this point look forward to the point where we've got a chief that really understands and knows well the department. Doesn't just come out of the rank and file, but has served in so many different positions. And you and I have gotten into a lot of detail and conversation about your first request as the chief coming to the Budget and Finance Committee and Public Safety and saying, these are the most important and critical things to me. We've put our faith in you, and I think we've done well.
Thank you, sir.
We have a lot to do, and this doesn't scratch the surface. I know we're all looking at the end of the year, what kind of budget deficit within the department we're looking at and how that rolls over in the next year as well. These are the challenges that we face. But the fire department, fire services, medical services within the department, transportation and transport, medical transport, it's the core function of what we do. And we've just spent a couple hours today talking about sidewalks. When somebody falls on a sidewalk and they're hurt badly, they call 911, they call you guys to come help. Public safety has to remain the most important function that we do, bar none. And so while we look at numbers on a page and the deficits that we've acquired and will continue to grow within the department, a lot of it is about performing core functions and things that we're starting to restore. So I want to applaud. You've already gone through a couple hours, actually, at the last Public Safety Committee, your entire memo, and articulated it well. And by the way, and I want to share this with my colleagues that didn't have the opportunity to be there, it was a visual statement because the chief sat down with no notes in front of him and went through virtually line item by line item and justification and the need and where it's going to go and how it's going to deliver better services, verbatim, without a single piece of paper. And I said at the end, not only did he do well and it all made a lot of sense and he was able to articulate it, we've got the right chief. This is a guy that knows the department. This is somebody who understands the needs of the department and to restore these key functions. So I want to thank you for taking the time to put that together as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bonnet.
Thanks. Chief, I'll ask you the easy question first. What's the next station we really need to provide more resources to?
Well, we're going to use our metric system, sir, and come up with the metrics to determine that next station. I know Fire Station 69 is high on the agenda, though.
Okay. I didn't like that metrics part, but I'm usually in favor of the metric stuff, but...
Everything old is new.
Yeah. As someone who likes you as a political advisor, that sentence would have been so much better received without the preceding clause about the metrics and stuff. Happy to support the proposal. I think everything Councilman Englander said is absolutely true, and as I noted when we did this in public safety, I needed to look at my notes, and I still do. But a couple questions about the section on improving response time.
Yes, sir.
Which I think is something that is on the minds of everybody. I'm just wondering, because the addition of the second 24-hour assistant chief to the Fire Bureau concept was put under that heading, and I'm wondering how you see that as helping improve response times.
The bigger element of that provision, that addition of the 2nd Division office, was that in the instance of a major incident, like we had the Wharf fire that burned for 32 hours, we had the Venice storage fire, which I saw you at for 14 hours, or we have a spontaneous brush fire, that division chief's gone. So the bigger concern when I put that down was to have coverage when there's a long duration or simultaneous incident. To your question about response times, it will be a response time of a division-level command team. Absent that piece, it would have been dependent upon special duty people coming from home after hours. And our people live throughout the region. So if there was a major earthquake, there'd be a question, could they get there at all? And the second question is, if they could, how long would it take? So this goes to getting there quicker and having a division command team in those scenarios.
Okay. You mentioned metrics, so I'm going to mention it back to you. In the budget deliberations this year, there was a instruction to instruct LAFD to report to the Public Safety Committee with the metrics to be used to evaluate the success or the failure of the consolidation of the 4 bureaus, including on response time and other things. The report should include implementation of the expansion from 2 to 4 bureaus. We haven't seen that report yet, I don't think, in Public Safety Committee. When do you anticipate we'll see that?
We are actually starting, we're scheduling with the various council offices as we speak to give an in-person presentation. We're ready to go now. It's in the scheduling process. We've already briefed the mayor's staff. We wanted to come to Public Safety Committee members first, then the rest of the council.
Okay, cool. Also wanted to ask a quick question about the Supply and Maintenance Division request. Also very happy to do that. The one I'm curious about is replacing the air tanks. I mean, we saw that being as a crucial tool at the storage fire. I'm sure it was pretty important down at the Wharf fire as well. How are those resources that you're asking for going to be deployed? Is it the 40-hour work week schedule, or is it platoon duty?
Currently, we have a platoon duty system, but we're only funded for 2 of the 6. Mm-hmm. What we're requesting is the funding to staff the additional 4 and put them on a 410 schedule to avoid paying the FLSA penalty. So before we do that, we're researching the pros and cons of doing it, because as you pointed out, those are 2 major emergencies where it paid off to have that 24-hour platoon duty team. In the Venice fire, they changed over 300 bottles. Yep. They refilled over 300 bottles. In the Wharf fire, they brought down cargoes of foam. And they're our 24-hour logistics team, if you will. So we're going to evaluate that very closely to determine which way to go in terms of the work schedule.
Yeah, I want to discuss that more as that process goes along. I'm really concerned about the having to refill the tanks. I mean, from the guys I've spoken with, that can be pretty dangerous, pretty hazardous, and if we don't have the capability to refill them, obviously there's a huge problem. So how they're deployed and whether or not we have round-the-clock ability to do that is something I want to track.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Kress.
Yeah, do we actually know what our average response time is now to medical emergencies? And if so, how much of an impact on improving that will all the things we're approving have in the aggregate?
Our citywide average after dispatch is 5 minutes and 3 seconds of all incident types. The number one thing that's going to make a difference in this budget request is our new medical card system, which is going to be supported by the dispatch medical dispatch manager. That's going to come online in December 1st, our new medical card system. We've detailed a person there temporarily until we get authorization and approval to start paying this person full time. We're looking at response time savings in the call processing piece of anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds based upon the incident type. Basically, we're asking more pertinent questions and hitting dispatch faster than we currently are doing today. I just got briefed on that this morning, and we're still on target to go active on December 1st.
And you mentioned the need to get something approved. Just what's the process? Are we slowing that down in any way that we can work around?
Well, we're covering the expense of that person right now through our current budget, and within this request, that position is being requested to be funded full time.
Okay, so part of this process will take care of that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Thank you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and we're excited to have you as the chief.
Thank you, sir.
Usually when we get these kind of requests 4 months into the fiscal year, I would be more reluctant. I mean, as a new chief, we want to cut you the slack, but in general, it's the kind of thing that you want to see done through the regular budget process. And I'm sort of putting aside a lot of my questions in terms of that, because you are the new chief, and I want to get you the appropriate slack for that. I do want to know the assumptions that are made about the number of new firefighters hired this year, and are we on track as far as that goes? What are the assumptions that underpin the requests?
We are on track. We have 3 drill tower classes scheduled this fiscal year, and we'll be asking for 5 next fiscal year. We have a class starting December 29th of 60 recruits. Then we have a class March 23rd of 45 recruits. And then we have a 3rd class of 60 recruits. So to answer your first question, we are on track. The part in our request that relates to that is the recruitment piece. We really need to do a better job of recruiting from within the city that reflects the qualifications as well as the diversity that we need. And to that point, Chief Beck has agreed to let me partner with him in his high school magnet program. He has a police officer magnet program. We're going to change the name to a public safety officer magnet program at 4 high schools. So I don't have to rebuild the infrastructure. It's already there. We're just going to develop the curriculum. On top of that, we want to support all our ongoing fire academies, our Explorer program, our Crew 3 program, and that's all contained in our recruitment request.
Great. And then 2 questions that are a little more on the micro level. One has to do with the extractors. My office, we've been working with Station 104. My predecessor was able to donate money for one of those extractors, and working for more than a year, we were able to get, we were told that it's going to be installed by GSD using Prop F funding. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what the status is I'd like to know what the status is of that installation, but more generally, I noticed the report is asking for $240,000 to install 14 extractors donated by the Fire Foundation, which is about $17,000 per installation. And I want to understand those costs, because it does seem kind of, I mean, when I was talking to the guys at my station, they kind of were like, well, we could just kind of jimmy this thing. And I know nothing's ever that simple, but it seems like a lot of money for this. And why are we using general fund and not Prop F or donations from the Fire Foundation or other revenue sources for the extractors?
After we met a few months ago, I did have a meeting with GSD, and I asked the same question: how could this cost so much? And I learned about contingency fees and about unknowns. And I got a commitment from the GM to work to reduce that contingency fee. I don't have a status of 104s yet, but this request will go towards installing the 14 extractors that have already been donated by the Fire Foundation. It is a little frustrating, and I apologize for the delay, but we have been working on it, and this is going to go a long way towards installing those 14 that are stuck in our supply and maintenance division.
And then the last thing also has to do with sort of a GSD issue. You know, I understand when you add staffing and computer space, and you got to ask for funding, and there's $250,000 in this request. But I chair the ITGS committee, and usually when departments are coming forward, we have a lot more backup on what the assumptions are. So I don't know if it's possible. We'd like to get a report from GSD on what the options are for locating staff, the actual costs of this, and this is sort of standard practice, what we do with most departments. And so we know what the actual costs are, and maybe to get a report like that could come back to ITGS so that we really could understand and make sure that those are the right costs, whether they need to be more or less. But I didn't see in that request the kind of backup that we usually see on this type of request.
Yes, sir. We'll get that to you in a few days.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would ask to make that part of the report.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll get to that in a minute. Chief, I think I want to first of all echo comments of my colleagues. Thank you for getting us on the right track to the restoration of the fire service. This is a department that has clearly been decimated. It is, I've said many times, it is my number one priority without really a close second for restoration as the economy recovers and our budget recovers. And you've put forward at least the beginning of a plan to start doing that. And I think as Mr. Blumenfield indicated, in that you're the new chief and you weren't here in time for the budget for this year, it's appropriate that we have this sort of a request. That being said, I have to also temper that by saying that every department head in the city comes to us with mid-year requests for adjustments, and we've been extremely conservative in not granting them, in part because we're still not out of the woods, and we're 3 or 4 or more years from getting out of the woods. And the fire department in particular continues to run a structural deficit because of the ambulance augmentation and a number of other reasons. So we already have a built-in hole that we're trying to fill for the department. This makes that hole $4 million deeper, frankly. So I want to try to continue to support us moving in the right direction, but in the context of knowing that the city still is facing severe challenges, and even the department, as you know, the departmental budget faces severe challenges as well. So I want to go through a few of these with you. I think for the most part, many of these are directly related to immediate improvement in readiness and responses. So I think those I would be prepared to support at any time, mid-year or otherwise.
Yes, sir.
But there's a few that I wanted to ask you some questions about. First of all, the fire inspectors for development services, absolutely critically needed. And what I'm wondering on that one is whether that will be fee supported. So would some of the cost of this, in other words, the $604,000 a year that we're devoting to this, wouldn't most of that be recovered through developer fees?
Yes, sir. That request was as a result of complaints I got, quite frankly, from major developers saying one day where an inspector doesn't show up costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
So I wanted to address that piece and support downtown and citywide development.
So this is one of those examples of a step to make Los Angeles more business-friendly, to increasing our economic development activity by spending money from our general fund, money that would be less available, by the way, if we reduced the gross receipts tax, but that's another question for another day. So this money, though, would be fee recovered.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. So, and then the extractor installations, that's a one-time expense for installation of this.
Yes, sir.
These extractors. It's not an ongoing expense. Okay, so that brings me to the staff relocation and build-out component, that $250,000. I would actually, to Mr. Blumenfield's point, I would actually like to ask that component be removed from this recommendation, referred to ITGS for further consideration. I'm sure it's important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's probably less critical than some of the other things, and it probably, the relocation costs and space issues and so on, that I think would more appropriately be something considered by the ITGS committee.
If I could weigh in on
Please.
this.
It's actually something critically important. In fact, we just had another hour-long meeting on just that issue. And in fact, we've identified a solution to, but probably not one that's going to require some money. LAUSD, and we're in contact with them now, they sell, for those nonprofits that are listening as well, they sell their old modulars for $1, but there's still a relocation cost, and there's still a cost to build them out, to put in the plumbing and electrical, and so we've identified that already, but it's something that there's no way they can operate that requirement in the space, the confines they have now, so that is just as important on a timeline, but if it's critically important that it go to the other committee, I know we've already vetted it and spent a lot of time and research on that.
I could provide a little more background to you. This is more specifically to support our 4 Bureau concept plan.
Right.
And we're going to be moving to stations 3, 88, 82s, and then the San Pedro City Hall. 88s doesn't have the space, so we're looking at a modular system. We're moving forward on that, and whatever direction you give us, we'll make it happen.
Well, and I guess that maybe we need to talk about the 4 Bureau plan, because to Mr. Bonnet's point, I had understood that was going to, that direction, in fact, we slowed it up in this committee in order to allow you to arrive and weigh in on it, and you have now, and this seems to be the direction you're going in. But I thought that there were going to be reports back on that and its implications and impacts. I don't know if they were supposed to come to Budget and Finance as well as Public Safety, but that hasn't happened yet, and we're spending money relating to that plan as though it has already been finalized. And that's, I think, to Mr. Bonnet's point and my concern as well. Mr. Ingles?
What I would suggest perhaps is maybe hold that item here just in committee rather than recreate the wheel, recreate a whole nother committee process. It's already gone through 2 committees. We're all in virtually the same committees anyway. Hold that item here. The Bureau plan is being presented. I just had a briefing on it. They've got a written plan, and they're going to be meeting with the council members as well as bringing it to Public Safety. So it'll allow that time when then perhaps they can even come together.
Okay.
So if that,
Yes, sir.
if that's okay.
If that works
Yeah,
for
I mean,
Mr. Blumenfield.
it's not a matter of, committee jurisdiction. It's just, we always have, we have a department, GSD always looks at these things and gives us the report on the spacing. So we want to have them bring that report here.
Perfect.
That's fine, but I think as a matter of city policy, unless there's an urgency in which, I want to do everything we can for the fire department, but we ought to let GSD weigh in on it, because that's what they do, and we rely on their counsel.
So let's hold that one then in this committee, and then that'll allow you time to be able to get that report back here.
Bring
or-
them, if it's a matter of
Sure.
timing, we could have that report come here. I'm comfortable with that. Again, it's not about committee jurisdiction, it's more about the
Okay.
process.
All right,
yeah.
let's, that sounds like a good solution. And likewise, the second 24-hour assistant chief, your proposal bases that on the 4 Bureau concept. I think it's necessary under any circumstances, just because your command staff is so decimated, you need more command staff wherever you put them. But again, that's how that fits into the big picture until we see what that 4 Bureau concept is going to be. I'm unclear, but I'm happy to support it just because you need more assistant chiefs under any circumstances. So I guess that's an editorial comment.
Chair's prerogative.
Yeah. Now, can you talk about the FireStat LA unit expenditure? I know that FireStat LA's moved forward is great
Yes, sir.
development. Is what I'm going for here is what can really wait until the normal budget process, and what's critical that we do now? Because some of the remaining ones on the list, I might or might not be supportive of in a mid-year, but some of it seems like it could just simply wait until the normal budget process, which is almost upon us anyway.
Mhm.
So,
They're all very critical. They are in a somewhat of a priority. They are in a priority order as well. The FireStat staffing. We recently had a press conference where we rolled out our data for the first time. We triple validated it. From here on out, we're going to single validate it, but that takes people. And our outside consultant, Dr. Yoshida, recommended that we get 2 additional positions to continue the validation, as well as to expand our metrics throughout the entire department, because right now they've been focused on response time data only. So this will help us become more metric-driven and enhance performance throughout the department.
Okay. And the dispatch system manager you mentioned earlier will be critical to upgrading that card system that they go through with dispatch, which directly increases response time.
Yes, that's the most cost-effective and efficient thing we have happening right now. That person's been training our dispatchers on the new system. So that person is absolutely critical to getting an immediate improvement in our response times in the call processing area.
Okay. The recruitment staffing, can you talk a little, that's $1 million of this almost. Can you talk about what that goes into? Because recruitment itself isn't a challenge that this department faces. Everybody wants to be an LA firefighter.
Yes, sir.
The question is, how do we make sure that the department looks like Los Angeles? How do we avoid some of the problems that we've had in recruitment of the past classes and so forth? So what's the rollout of this? How is this money going to be spent?
We have a plan to cover 4 areas, the recruitment, the mentoring, the test prep, and the youth programs. I spoke of the youth programs previously in terms of the high school and our academies and our cadets. We want to support that. The other 3 pieces go to those people that we're actively recruiting today. The high school and the youth programs are for the future. I recently completed my first review of the initial pool of 300, and it's a challenge to balance qualifications with diversity, to be honest with you. We need to do a better job of increasing the diversity pool, and this is going to help us do that. I think the bigger numbers we get, the higher likelihood we get the best.
So I don't want to nitpick this too much, but we are hiring now. Those components that relate to our current hiring, I think we got to spend the money right now and get that right. If there are components of that, again, that we could roll forward into the next fiscal year under the normal budget priority, that would help us avoid adding to the hole that the department is in, and that's what I'm looking for. So if there's a way that you can pull some components out of that could wait, that would give me a little bit more comfort.
Okay.
And likewise, with the just to wrap it up, the community liaison part, you need more of that, I get it, but again, that seems to me something that probably the immediate need is not so great as some of these others, but it should be given high priority in the next, in the normal budget process that we're going into. So that would be one that I would ask if you can hold it until the budget.
Yes, sir.
But I think everything else, everything on the first page of your recommendations, all are critically important. Some of it will be recovered by fees. I would support all of that. The staff relocations I would suggest that we hold here until we get that report back from ITGS. The assistant chief, I would recommend. The fire stat, I'd recommend. The dispatch system manager, I'd recommend. And then if we could hold on the community liaison, and then if on the recruitment staffing, if you could come back and figure out if we could reduce that number to only what's needed for current hiring, and then put the other component into next year's budget, that would help.
Yes, sir. We'll come back with a phase-in plan for that.
Okay. Does that make sense, members, to take that approach? Okay. So with those recommendations and I guess amendments,
Mr. Chair,
suggest that we, yes.
In reading the report and reading the recommendation, our office just needs some clarification from the committee with respect to the actions that you would like our office to take. Currently, the recommendation states that the CAO identify funds to transfer the $4.1 million to several accounts. So my question is, one, if you approve as amended today and council approves in a subsequent meeting, is the department authorized to start expending funds concurrent to I mean, consistent with what was recommended before we actually identified these funds? Or do you want us to come back first with identification of what those funds are before the department actually starts spending those dollars? As you know, as you mentioned, we still have a $20 million deficit within the department that we are currently trying to identify funds for.
Yeah, actually, that's a fair point on the mechanics of it. Would it be, if we, you've heard the recommendations that we want to, the direction that we want to move in. If we hold those recommendations for, say, a week, would that give you some time to think about the mechanics of how to get that done?
Well, I think in that time frame, with respect to identifying funds, the only viable source of funds that we could identify in that short amount of time would be the reserve fund. So if your committee is
Well, I already
willing,
gave you one. You're going to get more fee revenues from the.
well, with the exception of that specific fee-for-service item, all the other items would have to be a general fund, and in essence would have to come from the reserve fund if that's the case. So if that's the direction that you already know, I think you can make that distinction now so that we.
And just
Yeah, Mr. England.
Just for clarification, wasn't that the recommendation? I'm not sure if there was a CAO recommendation, but wasn't that the idea that that's where it was coming from?
I don't think there was a
No,
CAO.
there was no
There was no
report
CAO
on this
recommendation.
at all.
What was the belief, and let me ask the chief perhaps, and it's really for the CAO, but where the identified funds would be coming from? What was the intent?
I don't have the expertise to answer that question, sir. I don't know.
No, I don't want to put you on the spot on that, nor should you. I mean, it's really directed towards a CAO. So I believe it should be the reserve. That's what I assumed, I think, from the beginning, that it would be from the reserve account. And so if we're going to come to the same conclusion next week, that's really the question, is if that's the reality, only because I won't be here next week.
Mhm. Okay. Members, given what the CAO has indicated, any thoughts about how you'd like to proceed? I mean, in other words, the upshot of this is approval of these recommendations today increases the fire department's deficit, and this funding comes out of the general fund. I'm sorry, out of the reserve. So if we're going to take a different route, then we would want the CAO's creative recommendations on how we might be able to do that. But the implication of acting today will be to reduce the reserve fund.
I have a suggestion.
Mr. England.
That we act with that, but we ask the CAO, when is this slated for council?
It hasn't been scheduled yet.
Okay, so if we can give it, instead of pushing it through, there's no holding place on council Wednesday or Friday. Those agendas are out. That it come back when it's scheduled for council, if you can identify other alternatives as well. So we move forward as suggested.
It'll be longer than a week.
Right, because we've got, right, exactly. We have National League of Cities. So it's going to give more time. It moves it forward, but if we can identify any other possibilities, even for portions of the fund. Will give us that time.
Yeah, to be candid, I'm fine with having it to come out of the reserve fund because I think it's that level of importance and priority. But it has been our practice across the board with all departments not to do that. And so I think we ought to at least take a moment to try to figure out if there's a way that we can avoid that happening. So to your point, Mr. Englander, if we move forward today, as I've suggested, we don't need to schedule it immediately for council consideration. We can work with the CAO in the interim to try to develop some alternatives.
Okay.
And the CLA. Okay?
Yeah.
Everybody good? Yes. All right. That'll be the action of the committee. Thank you, Chief, very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
Very much appreciate your good work on this. Thank you. And that brings us to our final item, item number 2.
Item number 2 is a Los Angeles Fire Department report and supplemental report submitted in response to the motion Krikorian Englander relative to the objectives of the public safety technology team, staffing and funding needs, and the status of the proposed and ongoing public safety technology projects.
Good afternoon. We've actually had this before us before, so before you make further report, I want to give the floor to Mr. Bonin because he has to scoot pretty soon, so
Thank you very much,
fire away.
Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you for coming before us, both departments. I am very supportive of giving every technological tool possible to both of our public safety agencies, and very grateful for Chief Terrasas' commitment to that as well. I have my tablet project that I've felt strongly about, and the department has wavered back and forth, and I'm very grateful for your commitment. And I'm very eager for us to have a robust discussion and exploration of whether or not to merge the CADs. I think I'm one of the more skeptical folks about the CAD merger, but I'm certainly willing to approve the money to make sure that we can adequately analyze it and study it. I just want to be sure that we're spending the money and the merger isn't a foregone conclusion, and we're just trying to spend money to justify a decision that we want to come to. So I had some questions in budget last week, and I thank staff for doing some work in response to that. Some answered my questions, some prompted a few new ones. So my first question, because last time it seemed, the written report last time seemed to indicate that there would be a public safety information officer, LAFD information officer, and or technology officer, and an LAPD one. And on questioning last week, I was told that was wrong, that there'd only be 2 positions, but then I see in the org chart that the 3 positions are there. So I'm trying to get a clear sense, are there going to be 2 positions or 3 positions?
It's actually going to be 2, and the org chart does represent 2 separate boxes, but that is 1 person.
Which?
The LAPD CIO and the CIO for public safety.
Okay, that's something that is a concern to me, that it would be the same. I'd actually be comfortable with the 3 positions. I just feel, particularly as we approach a CAD merger discussion, that having the person who is the chief tech person being also the LAPD person just really puts the weight on the scale. So I'm concerned about that. I thought it was going to be 3 based on the reports and on the org chart, and so I have a concern about that, because I'm a little concerned about how that gets balanced and massaged out. That answers a couple of my questions, though, because on the org chart, the fire CIO reports just to the fire chief, and the CIO for public safety reports to both. So effectively, the LAPD CIO is reporting to both chiefs.
The public safety CIO, who is also the LAPD CIO, is
Right.
reporting to both chiefs, correct?
So given that the CIO for public safety reports to both chiefs, one of my questions was going to be, well, who's in charge of the hiring, who's in charge of the firing? It sounds like there's been a decision made about the hiring. How was that made, and what's the decision if we decide later we should have 3 positions or we should do something different? Who makes that decision? The police chief, the fire chief, the mayor's office?
Are you referring to the public safety CIO?
Yeah.
That was a collaborative decision led by the mayor's office. To your point previously about a foregone conclusion to the CAD, that's not my interpretation nor of any of the discussions I've participated in. It's always been, let's conduct a feasibility study. And Ms. Goodrich came before Fire Commission last week and explained the process, that we're going to look at the user requirements of our fire department CAD. We're going to look at the police department CAD to see can it accommodate our requirements. And then we're going to do a gap analysis of those 2 things. That analysis is going to tell us which direction to go. Is it integration? Is it a modification to accommodate fire? Or is it to go and get a new CAD for the fire department?
Got it. But I want to go back to my other question. So who's responsible for hiring, firing, evaluating, measuring the performance our satisfaction with the performance of the CIO for public safety, if it's jointly supervised?
It would be both myself and Chief Beck.
Okay, that's a little unusual, and I'm not quite sure how that works. That sets off my spider sense a little bit on that one. Right now, the CIO for LAPD has a pretty big job. And I've read described the mission and the scope of work for the CIO for public safety as being different. So why do we think that those two jobs should be done by the same person? Maybe they can be, but why should they be?
Well, Chief, did you want to?
What I would say at this point is it really is very early in this process. The potential of needing a third public safety CIO, and Ms. Decker can come up, that may be in the future. But it doesn't seem to make very good sense until we do this analysis and really understand how this is going to work to hire somebody and have three, if in fact this is just in the investigative stages right now. And so that's really one of the pieces that I know that Chief Beck was talking with Chief about. But Eileen, you might want to speak to that.
Good afternoon. I would echo what Chief MacArthur has said. This is a process where we're trying to determine what is best for the departments. We've had extensive conversations with Ms. Goodrich, who you heard from last week, who is very knowledgeable about CAD systems and, frankly, the technology in the police department. Our goal is to elevate the amount of technology in the fire department, and that experience will be of great benefit to the fire department, not only because Ms. Goodrich is aware of the city, she's aware of working with ITA, the complexity of the issues in the police department, and the fire department can benefit dramatically from that. It is a process of where we're going to constantly be evaluating. We neither want to take away the competency of the police department team. We're trying to add to the overall competency of the fire department team. But also because we believe there could be efficiencies of scale here where the fire and police department can benefit from having shared technologies in certain situations, not in all, but that there are economies of scale that could be evaluated. So what we talked to both the chiefs about was the opportunity of having Ms. Goodrich, at least temporarily, be what's called on the org chart CIO of public safety, ensure she has a robust team in the police department and in the fire department, and we can evaluate how those economies, whether we are going to achieve economies of scale, whether it gives us greater efficiencies as we try to build greater technology capabilities in the fire department, and whether there are those economies of scales that we think are there but perhaps are not.
So I hear you. I'm not quite sold, to be honest, but I'll ask the same question I just asked to the chief. Who's going to make that determination about whether or not we need to fill the third position or have a different CIO? Because I haven't seen, it's probably good to have people who aren't siloed into departments, but I'm not sure how we manage and evaluate that because we haven't really seen a lot of that in the city.
It is somewhat of an innovative structure that's being presented to you, and the fire chief and police chief have agreed that they will work collaboratively on this, that they are side by side in this effort of developing what is a creative approach to dealing with technology that public safety is in need of.
What if they were to disagree, though? I mean, we have a great cooperative relationship with these two chiefs, but that's not a foregone conclusion that we always will or that we have had in the past. What happens if they disagree?
Well, we would think it would be a rare case of a disagreement. Obviously, fire department issues will be decided by the fire chief, police department issues by the police department, by the police chief. However, in those instances where there's a disagreement, they would present it to the mayor.
All right. Let me ask a financial question. Last week, this request was for about $500,000. Now it's like $1 million. How did it jump almost double in a week?
Since last week, let me go back to 2 weeks ago. What we indicated to the committee a week ago was the fact that there would be existing staff that would be detailed as part of the public safety technology team.
Yes.
Upon further evaluation of the fact that, as you recognize, we do have a major deficit within the department, and we recognize that detailing these individuals, we would have to rely on what we call our variable staffing overtime account, and detailing these individuals for up to a 6-month period is going to completely drain our account. And it's for that reason that we're asking for the funding at this time.
So I was correct. It was 500,000 last week. It's about $1 million now.
Correct.
My staff tried to do some back-of-the-envelope math for me, and the positions that they added up came to about $750,000. And there seemed to be a delta between the funding for the staffing, which would be $750,000, and the total request. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, sir.
It was a little hard to figure out because the org chart and the document that broke everything down wasn't exactly parallel, but they indicated that when the 4 added positions were accounted for in cost, there remained $277,000 exactly that's not accounted for over last week's figure. If you took last week's figure and added and added the 4 new positions in, there's still $277,000 left over.
Are you just looking at the salary accounts, or are you also looking at the other items that we're requesting funding for?
Where are those?
What we did was we incorporated the funding needs to ITA as well as to the fire department for the additional technology needs to upgrade our INFRS and our arson investigation system.
Where's that broken down?
If you look at the last page under recommendation number 4.
Yeah. All right, let me check with my staff on that, because they did account for that and still saw that there was a hole. That's all I got for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I love the idea of elevating technology in fire. I'm big on using technology to make government more efficient and effective. So excited about that. Last week when we talked about this, I asked about the ITA involvement because I chair that committee and work with them on a lot of issues. And I wanted to bring Ted Ross up as well to hear from him in terms of their readiness and capability. I was told their key part of this is the backbone of this system. Ask Ted if ITA has the appropriate positions to support this initiative and the role that ITA has been playing in this, because after our discussion I checked in with them and they were not as familiar with it or they're familiar with it but not as involved as I thought they would be. So I wanted to hear from you directly and see what other needs are needed so that we make sure that across the board we're doing everything we can to support the technology that the city needs and that fire needs.
Thank you, Councilman. Ted Ross with the Information Technology Agency. The ITA provides, as most know, a fundamental support role in police and fire applications as well as the dispatch systems. So our staff support and maintain 44 applications for the 2 departments as well as the critical dispatch systems themselves. So we have been participating in a lot of the very specific project meetings and the discussions around CAD consolidation, et cetera. We did not have any resources associated in this report. I think from our understanding, the intent is to work closely with the public safety technology team as the projects are identified and evaluated, and then probably take it on a per project basis.
And then just in terms of, I want to make sure that across the board all of our IT folks are coordinating. What's the role of Peter Marks in the mayor's office in this task? I don't know who to address that to, but how are all of our technology heads integrating into this so that we're maximize our effectiveness?
And that is the role of the public safety technology officer, Ms. Goodrich. She convenes meetings with ITA, the fire department, the police department. The mayor's office periodically goes as the project might lend itself, for example, if there's grant funding involved. And Mr. Marks engages sometimes on the broader aspects of issues he's involved with, such like the Wi-Fi issues, things like that, if it's project specific. But Mr. Marks and Ms. Goodrich are speaking almost daily to compare notes and to evaluate different technology projects for the city.
I just want to make sure we're doing all of that, because I've seen even in my short tenure on technology projects, you know, us missing paths and missing opportunities. Another aspect of this, you know, in general on the technology side of things, we're trying to move away from large proprietary technologies, because what ends up happening is we build them, we spend a lot of money, we figure, you know, by the time we actually build them, they're obsolete, and only, you know, a certain number of people know how to use them, and then they're pretty much retiring, and this has been the ongoing thing. And so as a general technology strategy for the city, and we talk about this in ITGS committee, we're moving more toward, you know, the cloud, more toward, you know, public-private partnerships where we use off-the-shelf technology that, you know, upgrades itself along with when the private sector upgrades, our you know, software gets upgraded. Do I need to be worried about this in terms of the long term, what we're building here? How does that, you know, how much of this could we do off the shelf versus building our own technology, and how cognizant of this problem that we've had in the city for years are we?
And that is one of the issues that Ms. Goodrich is working on with the fire police departments and ITA and with Peter Marks about, are we getting the right kind of technology, whether cloud technology is appropriate. Of course, there's some public safety concerns I think the law enforcement community has to be concerned with cloud technology and whether it meets DOJ guidelines. But that said, they are looking at where can we implement this newer forms of technology. I know Mr. Marks in particular is working with ITA about our servers, and instead of upgrading those servers, can we go to cloud technology? So those conversations are happening, Councilman.
Okay, well, I guess I want to just keep on this and getting reports back on. I mean, I love what we're doing, and I want to see us move forward, and I don't want to slow any of that down. But I do want to, as much as possible, encourage us to go to off-the-shelf technology and, you know, not get caught in the spiral that we've gotten caught in year after year here.
Absolutely. I think everyone agrees with you on that, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Englander, bring us home.
Bring land is plain. First, I think all the comments from all my colleagues were incredibly valid, and I'm glad you brought ITA to the table as well, and all the comments that Councilmember Bonin made earlier. This has been so long in the making. The fact that we can even move forward with the idea of having a public safety technology team. So much of what we do relies on technology, or lack thereof currently. We're cutting edge 1984. And the fact that we don't have vehicle locator systems in all of our apparatus, in both police and fire. The fact that we are using antiquated systems and don't even have GPS. The fact that, and we can go on and on and on, we don't have our CAD systems are antiquated. The alerting systems in our fire stations, some of which come in on fax machines. I mean, it's just unbelievable, some of the technology we have. The idea, and one of the reasons LAPD has become where it is today, which is the department that the rest of the country looks to in cutting edge law enforcement, public safety, and protecting privacy for citizens, and everything they do with Palantir and database initiative systems, not just CompStat, but how they map out and do predictive policing now. There's nobody in the world doing this stuff, and everybody looks to us. With that, the fire department, I believe, is the best run department, bar none, in public safety, because they do far more with less than any other agency, with 3,000 sworn. To marry the two organizations and their technological expertise, if only for a short period of time, to get us through a strategy plan and to control and work and manage the various and the vast things that we're working on right now. We've got tens of millions of dollars on the street right now in RFPs. things that have to be tested, things that have to be tried and negotiated, and to have the key person that knows how to work with all the various agencies and departments, even for a short period of time, that will report to both chiefs, is just a spectacular scenario where the stars are aligned, that I can't say this time is overdue, quite frankly. The fact that we got ITA, LAPD, LA Fire, and the mayor's office all sitting at the table saying we need to move this forward tells me a lot. And I want to thank all of you because you've calibrated and communicated this effort well, and this is only going to help. And I want to speak to the chairman of the ITGS committee, Councilmember Bob Blumenfield, who made such a solid point. I want to make sure we walk away with that because it makes all the sense in the world. I've seen too long and too far and too much frustration of us building these systems, these antiquated systems that don't work, that we keep feeding money to hold on to. I mean, our phone systems here in the city are ridiculous. The fact that we're not VoIP and nobody can communicate, and half the phones in the library systems don't work. Having that direction from the policy chair of making sure that we're all strategically in place and aligned to adopt the latest technologies off the shelf, where we don't have to keep feeding that beast that we create that doesn't work, is ridiculous. So I support this initiative 100% and move forward, and I want to make sure that we heard loud and clear the concerns and suggestions from my colleagues as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Just one step beyond that, I think, as we're giving applause, the importance of moving into the 21st century can't be overstated. But this effort, I think, also has been emblematic of the extraordinary progress that this city has made in having our public safety departments work collaboratively and together, because that was not always the case. And as we all know, in the not too distant past, these departments didn't play well together. And thanks to the current leadership and recent past leadership of the two departments, as well as our mayor's emphasis on this, I think this is a great example of how we can move forward collaboratively. And to that point, I've heard to my satisfaction, I think, but there are those who've been concerned about this issue of whether the police department would have sort of a veto power. I'm very satisfied with what I heard, that this is a fully collaborative effort, and this is a support to the department's progress. And so I am not concerned about that based on what I've heard. The one thing I just want to clarify is this is a work in progress. We're moving forward. I think the recommendation of this committee is going to be to approve the recommendations and the staff positions and so forth. I do want to just make sure, though, that before hard money is actually spent on a new system, that's all still going to come back before us, and we're going to hear about that further. But the plan to move forward with the staffing and so on that's before us today, I would certainly approve the recommendations if that's the will of my colleagues, and it appears that it is. So with that understanding, it will be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations. So thank you all very, very much.
For the record, are those the recommendations in the supplemental report dated November 7th? Or is it a combination of?
Mr. Chair, if I can clarify the funding issue, I had a chance to review last week's report. The recommendations contained in the supplemental is the inclusion of the fund transfer in the FSR, which was deleted from the CAO report. So we wanted to ensure, obviously, that that funding was incorporated as part of our recommendation, and that the transfer from the UB was going to be effected.
Okay. So it would be the recommendations in the supplemental report. Okay. Very good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And we have no cards. General public comment is closed. There being no other action before the committee, we are adjourned.